Crummer Connections podcast series. So we appreciate that. Again, as Loveland said, I'm Mike Brown. I am the Director of Alumni Relations for Crummer. I'm glad to be here, glad to be with all of you. It's great. We've been able to open these up to alumni all over the US and really even the world. So it's great. Even on our registration, we had folks from over 12 different states in the US register for the event. So we're glad to continue to do these type of events so that people can kind of consume these, even if you're not in Central Florida, or if you're not able to make it at a given time, right? We know schedules are crazy, but it's great to do this because we'll be able to, as Loveland mentioned, record it. We'll be able to distribute it, which we will afterwards. Even folks that registered that couldn't be here, they'll get a copy, and we'll also put it up with all our other digital media for folks to, again, consume when they want. So again, thanks for being here. And it's great to have the entire Rollins family, right? We're focused somewhat on the Crummer folks, but this is open to all Rollins. So we have undergrads from the College of Liberal Arts from Rollins and also Hamilton Holt School with us. We have some distinguished faculty members with us and even some of our current students. So it's great to get the entire Rollins, Crummer, Holt family together. And again, we appreciate you all just taking out the time. We are so thrilled to have Natalie Schmook and Dr. Brian Walkup with us. Dr. Walkup, one of our great faculty members, one of our most popular faculty members, and also a Crummer alum, which is so great. And just a, kind of a personal note, Brian has been so supportive of the alumni work that we do, but also the alumni network in general. So it's great to have him here. And then also Natalie is a double grad, a Rollins grad and a Crummer grad. Her husband's a Crummer grad as well. So well represented. And Natalie serves on our Crummer alumni board. So we appreciate her continuing support there, but thrilled to have both of you here. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you to do some more specific introductions, but thanks for being here.
Absolutely. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen, hopefully? Awesome. All right. So yeah, first of all, just to kind of follow up on what Mike just mentioned, not only are Natalie and I both alum, but we actually were cohort mates back EA 9, which sounds like a really long time ago, but I always remind my students there's 2 intakes per year. It's not as long as it sounds. And Natalie's husband, Eric, was actually on my team. So we have lots of great tie-ins there. And I think our teams were probably the most competitive with each other of any teams that year. So I just want to provide some kind of real quick background on our topic, right? So first of all, Crummer Marketing reached out to us and said our class of 2037 numbers were maybe looking a little low. So that, not really, obviously that's a joke. But really the impetus for this is with Natalie and I both having our careers develop into finance. I think we both see a really huge need and gap in financial literacy. It's something that both of us have become more passionate about over the years. And I think a lot of filling that gap comes with just initiating conversations. And so for those of you guys that might have been a part of the last Crummer Connections with Sachin Jaitley, it was very technical, dealing with cryptocurrency. And that's really not our goal today, to be overly technical or bombard you guys with facts or anything like that. Really, our goal is to help us get that conversation started, recognize ways that we can bring our children into that conversation and help prepare them for what they're going to be dealing with as they go out into the business world. So we've titled today, Raising Financially Savvy Children from 5 to 25. So I'm going to shoot, why is that there? There we go.
Right. This has been so much fun coordinating with Dr. Walkup on this presentation. It's like we're back in the basement of Crummer in one of the breakout rooms working together. So it's really my pleasure to introduce someone who was my friend more years ago than I care to say, and continue to keep in touch with today. So Brian, during his time as an EAMBA student in Crummer in the best class, the EA 09, he worked at CNL Financial Group in the Lifestyles REIT. And he decided he wanted to follow in the footsteps of the amazing faculty at Crummer and joined the world of academia by getting his PhD at the University of Florida, which we will forgive him for one day. After starting his academic career at the University of Tulsa, he jumped at the opportunity to come back home to Crummer and has been on faculty there ever since 2018. That was one of my favorite emails I ever got from Crummer, was introducing Dr. Brian Walkup back on faculty. His main teaching and research interests are in the corporate finance decision-making, but he also does research on the intersection between finance and sports, which sounds about right. And so Brian's recently found a passion in personal finance and financial literacy. He was recently part of a conversation dealing with the addition of the required personal finance course in Florida high schools. And he and his wife, Tracy, enjoy traveling and adventuring with their amazing 5-year-old son, Carson.
Awesome. Thank you, Natalie. So Natalie has been in wealth management since we graduated back in 2006. She started her career in the high net worth group at SunTrust, which we now know has converted over to be Truist, where her and her partner managed $1.2 billion of assets under management for approximately 150 families with a focus on multi-general asset transfers. She then left SunTrust and founded where she is now, which is Hayes Wealth Advisors, which is an independent registered investment firm focusing on giving comprehensive, personalized, non-biased advice to help successful business owners build wealth outside their families or outside their firms. In addition to her world-class Crummer MBA, she's also a certified financial planner, certified valuation analyst, and a certified exit planning advisor. She's also the mom to 2 pretty cute little girls and happily married, like I mentioned, to my classmate and teammate and her classmate as well, Eric, who is also her winning mixed doubles tennis teammate as well. So I'm loving the opportunity to get to spend this time and interact with Natalie and present this with her today.
So on my part, because of the industry I'm in, I do have to present all these wonderful disclosures. And what they really say is what we're going to talk about today is pretty general, but if you need help with your own situation, please consult an expert.
All right, so just a real quick overview of our discussion today. So we're going to start a little bit broader, right? Even though our backgrounds are in finance, we all learned, whatever our interaction is with Crummer, the value of having a full understanding of how a corporation or a business operates. And so we want to talk a little bit about how do we intertwine all of those disciplines into the discussion with our children. And again, let me also mention, this isn't necessarily just for our children, right? It could be grandchildren, but could also be really anyone we interact with, right? I think it's important for these conversations to occur, and they don't always occur within each individual's own household. So other opportunities are valuable as well. So we're going to start with that discussion. Natalie will go into a little bit more depth on how to structure intra-family finances, and we'll talk a little bit about developing financial acumen at a younger age. And then we're going to kind of go towards how do we apply real world experience to learn some of these topics and develop those further. Okay, so we're going to start, like I mentioned, with kind of the core business principles and dealing with how do we get all those disciplines and help our children, our kids understand all the different relationships. But we're going to start with a question. So I'm going to pass it over to Natalie for that.
Great. So we thought it would be fun to test your financial acumen on different topics. And so we have some polling questions to go through with you. And the first one is this: what percentage of parents say that they are uncomfortable talking to their children about financial topics? So we got a couple questions, more seconds to answer. We will report your answers back to your professors at Crummer, don't worry.
First quiz of the day, right? First
quiz of the day. All right.
All right, I think we've had the majority participate, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share our results.
So you guys did really great. The answer is, in fact, 59% of parents are uncomfortable talking to their children about financial topics. And the study that we referenced was particularly fun, and we threw in the number 36%. Because 36% said they would rather talk to their kids about the birds and the bees than finances. And so recognizing that financial and talking about financial topics can be difficult, and hopefully we'll give you some tools today to make it easier.
And also interesting to note that 59% got the 59% correct. So I don't know if that's an overlap or random, right?
That is impressive.
Okay, so let's dive into some disciplines, right? Again, I'm a finance faculty, right? So there's a part of me that's like, I don't know that I feel comfortable talking about all these other disciplines, but that actually gets at kind of the point of our topic, right? We don't have to be a marketing professor or an economics professor or finance professor to talk about these topics with our children. As they're growing up, we really just need to spark curiosity and start building that understanding. Obviously, there's further education and things to develop those, such as what we offer here at Crummer. But the big thing is to get the conversation started. So we're going to start with marketing, right? Dr. Marshall, Dr. Johnston would be proud, especially of the fact that Natalie was able to rattle off the 4 Ps without us even having to Google them, which goes to show the impact the education can have on us. And so if we think back even to our core marketing classes, right, it's all about product, placement, pricing structure, and promotion. But we don't even have to get that technical with our student or our children, right? So why do companies create products and sell services? What is their goal? I think the easiest way I've had to relate to my son, again, he's only 5, so I'm on the beginning stages of a lot of our discussions today as far as my personal interactions, but he sees commercials all the time. And why are we seeing them? So we start having these conversations. He knows he wears Nikes when he goes out and plays. But why is Nike paying to put on these commercials? What are they trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? I think the big thing we can start to recognize is kids become the ultimate consumer really quick, right? There's a reason why Nickelodeon is bombarded with these toy commercials, because we've all seen it. The kids see the commercial, they come running into the kitchen. Mom, Dad, I've got to have this. And so it's a great place to start initiating those conversations of, well, what made you want that product? What is it about it? What about the commercial sold it to you? How did they differentiate themselves from their competitors through that process? The next one would be international business, right? So I think it's really easy at a young age to be very focused on what's immediately around us, right? So we know kind of the stores in our immediate neighborhood, but as they start to grow up, we can start recognizing this is a big world, and that affects how corporations operate. And I think we all can clearly see that the business environment's becoming more and more global. So the first conversation can be just about selling products in a different country. What might that mean? How does the culture of a different environment maybe affect how we might market to them, how we might go about selling it, things like that. But we can also start to expand the thought process into, well, what about supply chain issues? What about, acquiring material inputs in different countries? What are the benefits potentially for the company? What are the risks? Starting to recognize things like exchange rate risk and political risk and cultural risk, but also what are the benefits? Why might that help the company as they move forward? And just starting to make that thought process a part of their decision.
And this is such an easy place to, as you travel, if you think back to your summer, if you went somewhere overseas. So my family went overseas for a few weeks, and, we looked at how the money looked different and how the pricing was different and how there was a Coca-Cola bottling facility in this other country. And just even as you go to the outlet malls on I-Drive, if you see a gaggle of 30-something people from Latin America or Asia talking about, why do you think they're here? Why are they here in Orlando at the outlet mall making a line in front of the Coach store? And so this is a fun one to just, if you just keep an eye out, you can easily integrate it into your everyday conversations with children.
Absolutely. The next one is economics, right? And this one, there's so many really high level topics we can start with, and we can get really into the weeds really quickly. But I think it's important that we just start helping our children recognize what drives prices. What, going back to Natalie's example with the Coach store, why is there a line there? And start recognizing the whole balance of supply and demand. That also, one of the ones we're going to put some emphasis on is the entrepreneurial mindset, because it's such a broad encompassing of business and operations. And so if we can recognize supply and demand, that might help spur ideas for how do I fill an unfilled demand, right? That's a great way to start thinking about how to come up with business ideas. I know want versus need is a huge topic of conversation in our home, because it's really easy for kids to get, I've got to have this, I've got to have this. Well, do you really have to have this? Is this something you need to survive? Is this food? Is it shelter? Or is it something we want? How do we then prioritize our items within that want versus need discussion? And so that's a big one that I think it's hard to wrap your head around as a kid, because everything feels so necessary, especially at a young age. But starting to develop this idea of how to prioritize, which then leads into some of our discussions on budgeting and things like that. And the bottom one, I think we can all agree, we haven't had much of a better environment than right now to talk about inflation. I know my son hears me, back and forth, complaining, excited gas prices went down, complaining they went up, right? And we can see it day by day. We can start to see how those are driven and how things shift over time. And I think, I just had this conversation with our core finance class last night, the idea of nominal versus real rates, right? So we want our children to start thinking about saving, but we also need to recognize that at some point, if I earn, let's say 5% of interest, it doesn't necessarily mean I can buy 5% more product when I get that interest next year, because if prices are going up, the real rate is affected. So again, we don't need to go to a MBA level discussion on these, but just getting the wheels turning and helping them to start recognizing it's going to set them much better for future success. And so kind of on that thought process, like I mentioned before, entrepreneurship is really the one I think we could spend the most time on, right? This whole discussion, we've kind of centered it mostly on finance because that's our background, but really entrepreneurship is kind of the all-encompassing idea of how do we identify a need in the market? How do we come up with a business plan, a model that might fill that? And then start thinking through all of those branches of the different disciplines and what we would have to think through in order to actually make that happen. And it can be everything from as simple as a lemonade stand, right? I think we've all seen a young child sitting on their corner. We happen to live on a halfway busy road, so my son can go out there and get a lot of foot traffic and stuff. And he needs to think through, well, how much does the lemonade itself cost to make? How do I create some kind of actual margin on that? How do I market it to my audience? How do I engage the customer once they come up? And I know a lot of that, feels overwhelming as a kid, but those are really where the learning process starts to come up. And then as they get older, I think that becomes a really big opportunity for our kids, right? Let them explore a small business. My brother started a neighborhood lawn mowing business and then brought me on as his first employee as he got a little bit bigger, right? And there's lots of opportunities and lots of ways that we can do this. I was really fortunate to grow up in a very entrepreneurial household, and my dad was great at recognizing needs. So he started 3 businesses in 3 very different areas, and each one was able to find a little bit of success in our local neighborhood or local community. But I got to see that thought process of, even though my dad didn't have the college education, didn't have a business degree, he still had to understand how all those business components work together and make it happen. And so allowing our kids to start that and maybe even make some mistakes is a really big learning environment, right? So talk to them about, well, what are some of our different challenges we might face, right? And it's not always the obvious of, well, people might not buy my product. It can go down to all these different things. What if material input prices change, or right? And we can start thinking, what if a competitor comes out down the street or something? We can start thinking through some of the real challenges, but on a smaller level. And as they get older, we can start to make that more and more realistic. And then we could go, again, we haven't covered all the disciplines here, right? So, we could talk about strategy and management and operations and supply chain issues. And then something that is at the very heart and soul and very centric to Crummer and every part of our education, ethics, right? And how do we also make our community better through even a startup entrepreneurial type, job as a sophomore in high school or something? How do we use that to benefit our neighborhood, to benefit, that whole idea of stakeholders versus shareholders? So instead of just me making money, how do I give some of this back to my community in some way and leave the world a little bit better place through what I'm doing?
So it's time for another pop quiz question here. So, waiting for it to come up. good question, important question. What is the top indicator of whether a child will grow into a financially responsible adult? Is it their education level, how their parents manage money, or the amount of financial education they receive? We'll give it about 10 more seconds here.
Love the high participation rate. I wish I could get my students to actually I ask raise hand questions, and it's usually 70% NA because they choose not to. So I love the high.
All right. So the answer is, you guys are really smart, is in fact number 2. How parents manage money is the number 1 indicator of whether a child will be financially responsible as an adult. And so just keep that in the back of your head, because again, I know it's really uncomfortable to talk about money, but if you don't talk about it, your kids may not see how you manage it. And it's especially challenging, I would say, for wealthier families. You know, mom goes shopping and comes home with the new Louis Vuitton bag every few months. And that's what a kid sees. Well, you got to talk about the other piece of that, like how you can afford it and what drives into the ability to do that. So it just highlights how important communication is. All right, so now we're going to talk about how to talk to kids about money specifically. Brian, I'll let you kick it off.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes. So the first thing we want to talk about is taxes, right? I think for children, this can be, again, especially at an early age. Well, why, if it's said $2, or let's use the Dollar Tree, right? We all know well, maybe we don't all know, but my wife loves Dollar Tree. So I absolutely know they raised their price from $1 to $1.25. Well, that was a change that kind of represents the inflation side. But if my son happens to have 5 quarters, right, why can't I go into the Dollar Tree, take this up to the register and actually pay for it, right? Why is it more than $1.25? So we need to recognize things like sales tax, right? You know, why if I make X as a salary, do I not actually have X at the end of the day going into my bank account? So helping our children recognize what those taxes are, right? So I think we can at least start at the really high level with income tax, both federal and state level, sales, property tax. And then even as we start introing the conversation on companies, corporate taxes, why do we have corporations paying taxes as well? But then we really also need to focus on the flip side of that, which is, what are they used for, right? Well, where does all this money go? This is a substantial amount of money across all individuals and all companies. And so helping our children begin to recognize how the government spends that money for our benefits. So if they're in a public school system, recognize that the school is being funded through these taxes, the upgrades to the schools, things like that are all being funded, even the roads we drive on. So my son always finds it really interesting, especially, we live in Orlando, there's a lot of toll roads. So why do we pay to drive on some roads, but not pay to drive on others? Well, those roads still cost money, right? And so we need to understand that money has to be raised somehow. So it's partly through the tolls from the toll roads, but it's also through our taxes and other things as well, right? And if we move down to the second bullet point, I think it's also, and this isn't coming from a political standpoint, or we need to get into which side are we on a lot of these issues, but our children should be aware of the different types of social programs. What are the programs being offered in the United States? How might those differ from other countries? What are some of the pros and cons of that, right? So privatized healthcare versus socially funded healthcare, social security systems, how do they work? What are they for? Things like that. Again, I think the big goal here is to be objective. It's really just an introduction to the topic, a learning tool. We're not trying to force a thought process on them necessarily. It's more about just starting to understand, again, where our money goes, how it's being utilized, how it's spent, and what the potential benefits of that are.
Yeah. And the easiest thing to do as a parent, especially if you have young children, is to just talk about how much things cost. That could be as simple as keeping a running tally of what the price per gallon is at the gas station. It could be, you get to pick one dessert when we go to the grocery store, and maybe we go to Whole Foods one time and that's $7.99. And then maybe we go to, and I'm up in Atlanta, so if I say a store you don't know, forgive me, but maybe we go to Kroger another time, and the same thing might only be $4.99, and understanding why that is. So I'm a big believer in letting your kids have a budget. So if they have a friend's birthday coming up, give them a $20 bill and they can pick out what their kid gets at Target and see that, wow, the Lego set really cost $27. So guess we're going to go with the Pokemon cards instead, which I also think are $27. But giving them the ability to make those decisions really young and talking about how much things cost. So as a financial advisor, and I was just having this conversation with a client this morning, the biggest thing that I coach my clients to think of is money as a tool. And this is something that my parents said to me. Money is not good or bad. You shouldn't be angry at people who have it or guilty if you have it. It is a tool. It allows you to buy things and do things. So if we can frame that, and it's hard, especially with high school, college age, I feel like there's a lot of feelings around money. And at that point in time, you can kind of see who has what, and it's complicated. But money at the end of the day is either a piece of paper or something that exists electronically, and that's it. So as long as a parent, you're framing that conversation correctly, it can lead to a much better relationship with money, especially families with multi-generational wealth, where there are a lot of feelings tied up in it. Money's a tool. That's it. So when we start talking about how to use this tool, the most basic thing you should do with all kids of all ages is budgeting. And so, and that starts from, I have a 5-year-old and we do this with her. When she gets money for her birthday, we split it between savings and spending money. When she does a job for the house, we do the same thing. As kids get older, it's appropriate to start introducing the concept of a rainy day fund, especially when they start to get into responsibility times, like having a car, going to school when they have their first apartment, trying to get them to learn these concepts early and get in the habit of doing them. And then the last but not least, and this says young age, I'm a big believer in investing at a young age. My 7-year-old picked her first stock a few months ago. I was like, you like Disney princesses and you like Barbies, you know, thinking that we're going to go with a really well-known company. And no, she wanted an ice cream stock. So we had to look up the parent holding company of Yogli Mowgli, which is one of those little yogurt stores. And we bought $10 worth of 5-cent shares. And we now own 50% of Yogli Mowgli. So, but letting them be interactive and learn about investing in a way that means something to them and is real. And we'll talk a little more about that in a little bit. So I get asked a lot is how do we go through this budgeting thing? And so this is what I generally propose as age appropriate is from 5 to 12 years old, having a long-term savings and 50% spending. So anytime a dollar comes in, tooth fairy, birthday money, whatever it is, splitting between those two buckets. I do think there's the long-term savings, I would argue, would be investing at some point in time. And then from 13 to 18, really starting to allocate to a rainy day fund. You know, a 13-year-old knows they're probably going to get a car in a few years or wants to get a car in a few years. Well, guess what? Cars require maintenance and they break down. And, there is a deductible in Georgia if a rock hits the windshield. And so starting to build that rainy day fund early so that if they get in a bind with something that there's responsibility, that is not your problem as a parent. And then last but not least, young adults, that you can see that allocation switches up a little bit just because, there's apartments and bills to be paid for, but still putting a major emphasis on that long-term savings, because unless you have told your child they're going to inherit a whole bunch of money, and to expect that, saving through a 401k and with Social Security is not enough to retire on for most people. And the earlier you start, the better. The other thing is on the spending side, you can teach your children to spend responsibly. And so this could be everything from if they're going to go to the movie with their friends, well, you're not going with them, so they should probably pay for that with their own money. I have a client whose daughter was going on a ski trip and she thought her mom was going to pay for it. And mom said, I'm not going on the ski trip. And so the child had to pay for her own ski trip. So learning to set those boundaries on what a household expenses are versus a child's personal responsibility. Having them shop for clothes with a budget. And when they're young, really comparing, if we went to Target or if we went to Nordstrom, and you picked out three, a shirt, a skirt, and shoes, how much does it cost at both places? And do you really value the difference in cost? And then I mentioned this earlier, but letting them pay for friends' birthday presents at a certain age, that should be with their own money, not yours. When they're younger, it's fine if it's with yours. But same for holiday gifts. It's really tempting for us to go buy a present for daddy, what I know daddy will like. But what a good learning experience for a child to have a budget and go pick out what they think daddy would like, which he may not like, but it definitely makes for a more interesting gift. So next slide. Thank you. And then this is a big one, but talking about debt, because this is where financially most people get in trouble. I mean, period, end of story. Besides saving for retirement, debt is a problem for most Americans. And so learning about debt early is really helpful. So let's take a 16-year-old whose car needs a repair and they didn't have enough in their emergency fund. Don't be afraid to lend your child money, but charge interest for it. Let them learn from mean mom and dad the way the world works rather than a credit card down the road. Just talk about lending basics like car loans and mortgages. I'll never forget in college, I had a friend who was asking me why her boyfriend's parents were making, he had a house that he rented out to other kids, them sell it. And she goes, I don't understand. I thought when you had a house, you owned a house. And I had to explain to a 24-year-old what a mortgage was. They talk about amortization. These are concepts that a high school student can grasp. Even if they're not experts at it, they can grasp it. And then last but not least, talk about credit cards a lot. And when you get your kids a credit card, let them make the mistakes early and often while you can still log into their account, because credit cards are a huge problem for a lot of people, and learning how to manage them correctly is, and I know a lot of people just think they're going to go on a check card system, but at a certain point in our lives, those Delta Sky miles start adding up, and learning how to reasonably manage credit cards is a really important skill.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in real quick and just echo on this one, right? I mean, I think we've all seen the damage that poor use of credit cards can have, and it becomes such a cycle, right? And as someone who's becoming more and more passionate about personal finance and seeing the ramifications across our culture, I think that's one we can't overemphasize, right? It's very important. And going even back to the poll question, right? It's easy to think, well, this should be taught in school. We just added that in Florida high schools, and I'm a huge advocate for financial literacy education. But just like that poll showed us, the biggest amount of learning is at home, and seeing how the parents utilize it and the lessons that are taught by the parents. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen in every household, which is why financial literacy education is so important. But if we can double down and really present that at home as well, that's going to make the biggest difference at the end of the day.
And kids see it. My child says, when I have a card, she goes, Mommy, are you going to go buy money? That's what she talks going to the ATM. And I say, no, this is money. And so we talk about how this magical card that I have doesn't just do anything I want. There's a resource behind it that provides for it. So Absolutely. Those conversations can start very early.
Absolutely.
The other thing that, and this is one that I think a lot of parents struggle with as well, but incentivizing long-term savings and saving for retirement. So we're going to talk about some resources that do pay interest on savings, but as a parent, you have the option to pay interest on your kids' savings. And the best story I heard was an economics professor, of course, had a savings plan for his kids where he would pay 100% interest on their savings, but he only paid it once a year at the end of the year. So the kids, if they were going to save $100, they could get another $100, but that $100 had to grow and stay in that savings account for the year. And if they kept it in there the next year, they might turn it into $400. So, so it's okay to pay interest on savings and incentivize your kids. I'm also a big fan, especially with older kids when they have their first job and they're getting a paycheck, to match their investments dollar for dollar. So, if they start a Roth IRA, just say, hey, if you're going to put $100 a year paycheck in your Roth, I will match you. And so there's some limits there you have to make sure you're watching out for, but match your kids. And then also, especially for younger kids, contributing to a Roth on their behalf as a long-term savings tool is also a really good thing to do. Roth IRAs, if you don't know what they are, are tax-free savings vehicles. So once a dollar goes into it, it will never be taxed again. And it's a beautiful tool for anyone who has access to it. And I would encourage parents, if they have the resource, to maximize that tool for their kids.
All right, so we're going to switch over and talk a little bit about investing and what we can teach our kids, right? And this is a topic, obviously, I teach all the time in courses, so I'll do my best to keep from going into the weeds on this one, right? But again, we don't have to be, you know, a PhD in finance or even necessarily feel like we have this investing thing figured out to start having these conversations. So I think the very first question we should have with our children is, what does it mean to own stock, right? So again, what's the difference between a private company and a public company? When a company goes public, what does it mean to own stock, right? If we'd been having this discussion back in, you know, the 1940s, maybe we could show a stock certificate. It's a little different now, right? Because everything's electronic. It's all kind of a concept, but recognizing that we actually take a percentage ownership. It doesn't necessarily mean much, right? I'm not going to get to call up Microsoft's executives and talk to them, but I do have an ownership stake in that company. Well, what does that mean, right? What do I get in exchange for that? So not only do I kind of own a fraction of their assets and things like that, but really I'm buying a piece of the future performance of the company, right? So if I see, my son obviously sees Amazon boxes show up at our door a lot of times, multiple times a day, right? To be honest. And so he recognizes Amazon as a company. He knows how important they are to our lifestyle. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of us are very dependent on them. So if he wants to buy Amazon, what does that mean? What are we hoping is going to happen to Amazon moving forward in order for that stock to make money? And then we even need to think through, well, how do I make money? So understanding what is a dividend, and well, why don't we just buy the stocks paying the highest dividends then, right? So we need to recognize it's also about future growth of the company, capital gains. And so having this understanding of both types of outcomes for a stock and how we might make money. And then let's start having conversations on some of the tools and the resources. So one easy one to start with is an annual report. Don't go to Edgar and grab the boring, purely data version. Go to the investor relations and show them the glorious PDF version, right? Like we got the cover here for Coca-Cola's a few years ago, but show them a little bit of what's in there, help them understand what it means for a company to be transparent and to have to report out their earnings. We don't have to go through and do some complicated, discounted cash flow valuation yet when they're young, but as they get older, start recognizing, well, what's driving the value is these earnings that they're able to create. How does the company recognize their business model? How do they plan to create growth in the future? What do they see as risk? Talk about some of the components that are inside of that annual report, but also recognize, just like a commercial is trying to sell me Nike, Coca-Cola's annual report is trying to sell me on the future potential of Coca-Cola. So we need to come into it with our own perspective as well. Then recognize just how much is out there, right? I mean, we have analysts that spend 70, 80 hours a week analyzing this small subset of a specific industry. We're not necessarily, most of us are going to be long-term investors. We're not necessarily trying to beat these analysts, but we should use that information to our advantage. They're out there as resources for us. We should understand how to look at kind of the basics of an analyst report. We should understand what it means to have voting right. Again, what does it mean to own stock? Well, again, we've got this like principal agent relationship, and I'm technically one of the owners. Does that mean that I get a lot of say? No, but as a collective group, we do, right? And so recognizing what types of things we can vote on, but what types of things management has freedom to make decisions on. And then the last one, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with CEPA, but basically it's looking at indexed long-term passive investing versus active investing, right? And I think it's important to recognize, especially, I know I noticed a lot in the last couple of years, this push towards Robinhood investors and retail investors that think they can day trade, and beat these market experts. And so I think it's important to recognize just how hard it is to beat the market, right? So that we can recognize really what we're trying to do is be market participants, right? And invest in the market. Not saying we shouldn't encourage our kids and students and everyone else to look for opportunities of companies we think have good long-term potential. And maybe we try to beat the market by overweighting certain companies or industries. but also still recognizing how challenging this market is and how many participants are out there trying to beat the market.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is really important, and this is tempting to not do for higher net worth families, is to require skin in the game for kids. You know, I think that even if parents want to do everything for their children, I've never met one that didn't want their child to be independent. And so making sure your kids have a stake in some of the bigger things, especially as they get older, or even the little things when they're younger. When we go to the botanical gardens and have lunch there, I'll buy my kids lunch, but if they want a popsicle, they better get out their little check card and pay for it themselves. So making sure that they have a little skin in the game. Things like cars, making them save up for it, even if it's through their allowance or saving for their repairs or car insurance. Tuition in college is a really big one. So, you know, set a budget way before your kids are thinking about school. You can always break it later, but set a budget. So if it's in-state public, out-of-state public, this is your budget. And make kids apply for scholarships and aid and work study programs. Again, that doesn't mean they have to do it, but what a good process to go through and to understand, even if my parents are going to pay everything for me, what normal kids have to go through to get into college. And then consider doing forgivable loans. So again, setting that budget, and if you go over it, that's fine, but that's your responsibility. And then you, as a parent, choose to pay it off later after they graduate. So, and then last but not least, you know, discuss the return on investment of education. And so if your child's dream is to be a car mechanic, do they need to go to Brown University? I'm not going to pick on Rollins, but do they need to go to a really expensive school? And what is the benefit of that? And what do they get out of it? So kind of examining those factors as well. And then teaching your kids real world skills is so important. When a kid is in college, they should know how to go and get their oil changed by themselves. They should know how to go get new tires by themselves. And I think that this is tempting for parents to kind of handhold. They should know what their insurance is like. When they're out of school, split them off your car insurance plan, make them get their own. At 18, please get your child their first credit card where they start building credit. It is almost impossible to get a credit card after school. So get one early and then lock their credit. There is so much the fraud and identity theft out there that putting a lock on it early is a big deal. I mean, even for people with young kids, you can lock your kids' credit today. And then things like getting a new iPhone. If they want the iPhone 14, well, maybe they should pay that monthly cost and the cell phone plan, not mom and dad, and figure out that, hey, it costs money to go from this phone that looks exactly like my old phone, even though it has some new bells and whistles. Also a great opportunity to learn about contracts and how long you have to stick with something. So try to teach, especially older kids, make them do as much of that real world stuff as possible while they're under your watch, so that you can teach them how to do it correctly. And then last, this is not last, but it is the digital age. And I have a lot of parents who want piggy banks and dollar bills and everything. Your kids are going to learn how to manage money in a digital world. Embrace it and start it early. So for me, when my kid gets her money from the Tooth Fairy, we immediately put that into her Greenlight account, which I'll talk about in just a second. And we split it between savings and checking. And that way I get to recycle the same $5 bill every time she loses a tooth. So, but I mean, I think we must have $70 in quarters lost somewhere in this house because my kids think piggy banks are toys. So go ahead and start working with money digitally early, because it's not going to get less digital going forward. It's only going to get more digital. So 2 resources are Greenlight, and we are going to share this presentation. This is what we use. That's my daughter. You can have spending, you can have a check card, you can have an investment account on here. It does cost, I think it's $9.99 a month. And then there's another option called Go Henry on the next page. I think this one's $4.95 or something a month, but it's the same idea. And it's just it's a digital way to manage. And so one thing you can do on the check cards is you can limit where things are being spent. So if you have, I don't have a son, so I can say this easily. If you have a son in college, you know, maybe the bars and other less savory institutions are not able to be used with said check card. And then one more question, and we're going to fly through this because we want to leave enough time for Q&A, but another polling question for you. which is, what is the biggest predictor of future success? Is it your education level, how successful your parents were, or your willingness to work hard? So we'll wait till we get to that 93%. Let's see if we can do better than 93% participation this time. Couple more seconds. All right, we're at 93%, Brian. I think we can call it. You guys are so
there we go.
smart. So the number one predictor of success is the willingness to work hard. And so our last section today is going to be on kids and jobs and what that looks like and what it means and what you can do to foster hard work.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a big thing for encouraging our kids and helping prep them for what's to come after.
So one thing is that kids can work at any age. And what I'm a really big fan of not paying kids for chores. That is a household responsibility. No one's going to pay them for chores when they get into their own house someday. But you can find employment opportunities at home. So we draw the line. You have to water the garden as part of the household responsibility. But theoretically, I could pay the lawn guy to weed the beds. So I pay my kids to weed the beds. We kind of draw the line there. Especially at a young age, I think it's important to be really permissive with money-making ideas. My child wants to sell her used toys for $5 each on the corner to make money because she saw it in a Peppa Pig show. And I think that's a terrible idea, but I'm going to let her do it because I want to encourage that. And it will be a learning experience, I'm sure, to say the least. And then also encourage self-promotion and proactivity. So I can tell you, I'm sure Brian feels the same way, that babysitter who checks in to see if I need her is way more likely to get hired than the one who takes 2 days to answer back my text. So when kids are young and doing things like that, walking the neighbor's dog, they can walk over and put a note on the door that says, just a reminder, I'm available to walk the dog. So learning that proactivity and trying to generate business for themselves. And then when your kids are old enough to get a real job, please help them. The, what's it called? The form you fill out when you get a job, W-9, that thing has changed. It's backward. It's crazy. It's really hard to fill out. Please help your children with those things and explain what withholdings are and what state and federal look like, and all of those different pieces that mean nothing to them when they're staring at this form. And then walk through their paycheck with them and say, oh, gee, you thought you were going to make $400, but really you only made $302 after you had your Social Security, Medicare. What are those, right? Kids don't know that. And federal tax deductions and other deductions. Go ahead when they get that job, set that savings goal in advance. And those budgeting numbers I listed are based on net income, not gross. And then while they're getting a job, it's a great time to ask them. Mike's son works at McDonald's. I'm sure he can probably think of 6 ways that he's young, by the way. I feel like I should say that. But I feel like you could think of 6 ways that McDonald's could probably run better. Get your kids in that consultant mindset. Get them thinking about how a business can improve so that one day when they're in a role to make a difference, they're thinking that way.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk kind of quickly about one thing. I think this is something that everyone needs help with. I've even, thought before, we have amazing career resources here at Crummer, right? But it's something that every individual, as we go out and we get that first like real-time, full-time job, a lot of times all we focus on is salary, right? It's like, okay, I can make X here, or I could make X plus 2,000 over here. That 2,000 is what I'm chasing. But it's really important that we start recognizing what's the true value of all the components of a job offer. I'm again very much the finance perspective. So what's the present value, time value, money if we start discount rate? But it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's just recognizing the different components and starting to conceptualize that and put it together and be able to compare more apples to apples as a full picture, right? So health insurance, right? This is a big thing. It's a big thing, first of all, whether or not it's a part of the offer, and then which one looks better? Which one am I going to have to pay more in an average year? What's my normal needs, and what does this look like? How much value is that creating for me? Vacation days, right? We go from, I know a lot of students think they're very busy, and then the real world hits, right? And it's like, wow, I didn't realize how much I have to be on. Well, how much am I able to take advantage of being off a little bit here and there? And that's valuable. What are the value of those extra 5 days of vacation days to me? The ability to work from home, right? We've all seen this transition. Things are shifting quickly. How important is that to me? For some people, it might be actually a detriment. I want to be around my colleagues. I desire that, that ability to get to know my colleagues. But for other people, flexibility is key. So how do I value that as an individual? What's my utility created from that? The retirement plan, right? Natalie mentioned earlier, one thing we have to encourage is at least hit your matching. Well, what is the matching, right? That's essentially free money from your company put into your retirement plan. We need to recognize that and include that in our valuation. But then it gets, a little bit less quantifiable. Which place might I be mentored better and have the ability to move up, right? And so which one creates more upward mobility, whether it be internal or just as a resume line item to create that next step. And, this maybe isn't in our first offer much of the time, but stock options or some kind of employee stock ownership plan or equity stake in the company, how do we value those? And I've had, students come back years after graduation and say, I never thought I'd have to think about this, but how do I go about valuing the fact that they're willing to make me, a part owner? And how do I go about treating that as part of my total package? So just getting those conversations started and recognizing it's not just base salary that drives everything.
There was actually some chitter chatter about this in the chat box, so we're addressing it here. If you own your own business, you have probably seen that you've seen a lot of pictures of my kids in here. You can employ your kids at an early age and save for them. So if I'm in the top tax bracket and I pay my kids, I'm taking things out of my 37 plus in Georgia state % tax bracket, and I'm dropping it down to within certain limits of 15.3% tax bracket. So in a nutshell, if you pay your kids less than $12,200 a year, they don't have to file federal taxes. So you don't have to withhold for them. At that point in time, they have earned income. So you could pay their allowance through your business. You could fund a Roth IRA by paying them, which is what I do with my kids. And Roth IRAs can be used for college tuition. So you can take the principal out at any time, but the whole account can be used for medical expenses or college tuition. Really flexible account. So the one thing that I would say, can you hit the next button? Yes. Is you have to do this correctly. So if you were to get audited and you said that your kid was sweeping floors and you were paying them $6,000 a year to do it once a week, the IRS is going to say, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. You have to pay them fair market wages for the jobs they do. So the easiest way to do this is through modeling, to the extent that you're comfortable with using your kids' spaces, or other creative things like community service managers. There's some options out there. So this is a really big planning opportunity for family businesses, but it needs to be done correctly. And then last but not least, we want to talk about encouraging entrepreneurship, because this is such a big topic. And I think there's not anyone on this call who would not love if their kid was the next Elon Musk. Well, maybe not him specifically, but an entrepreneur. And so when you think about it, we talked about that lemonade stand. Your kid can be the neighborhood odd job person. They can walk dogs, they can babysit, they can pick up mail while people are out of town, they can water gardens. When they're older, let them, there's no crazy idea. This is a friend of mine's son. He loves sneakers, like Air Force Ones and things like that. And he will get on this app called StockX, which I guess is where people bid for sneakers. And we have really good sneakers here in Atlanta. So he'll go to the outlet mall and literally fulfill orders on StockX, bring the sneakers back and ship them to Parma, Ohio. And so when your kids have crazy ideas like that, let them pursue it. It's there's another, I heard about some high schoolers, girls who dressed up as elves and they made appointments, and they would go and ring the doorbell and they would do this little song and dance and take the kids' Christmas list, and they would charge like $20 for that. I mean, there's so many options out there, and any kind of experience like that is really, really important and could lead to something bigger in the real world. We're sharing this. There's some tools for families in here, and I know we're like right at the 1 o'clock hour. Brian, I can't speak for you, but I am good to stay for questions for anybody who would like to stay on longer. But yeah, But thank you guys so much for attending during your lunch hour today. This is always, you can't tell, but we love talking about this stuff. So if you do have a question, put it in the Q&A box for me, please. Oh, there isn't a Q&A box.
I think there's actually several in the chat, but I was trying to kind of follow it as we went.
Brian?
So for example, here's a question from Elijah. I think Natalie, this would be a good one for you. With the budgeting at all ages, how would you work in giving, teaching them the importance of giving back, giving to God, giving to charity, etc.?
I actually meant to note that in there, so I'm really glad you brought it up. And I think giving back is really important. I don't know if you saw my lemonade stand, but we did it for charity and I gave them a tip for it. But if you're a 10% tither, then just make another bucket that's 10%. And an app like a Greenlight or whatnot is going to have the ability to set up that kind of account. Austin, I just saw your question. And I'm going to let Brian read these because there's a lot coming through. A Roth IRA versus a 529. So not everyone is going to have the ability to give their 7-year-old a Roth IRA. I prefer Roth IRAs for college because they're more flexible. A 529 plan is a college savings tool. In Florida, you don't have state income tax, so you don't get a deduction. Here in Georgia, we get a state income tax deduction. It grows tax deferred, and if you use it for college, it's tax free. You don't use it for college. So if college tuition is free in 10 years, for example, there's a 10% penalty and you have to pay taxes on the growth. So not that it's not a bad tool, it's just not my favorite. If you have the ability to fund a Roth on an annual basis, that would be my first choice, with the caveat that a Roth IRA, depending on your state law, will become your child's money at 18 or 21. And so if you've built up a $100,000 Roth IRA, they could take it and go buy a $100,000 car.
Mike, I know you've probably had a little more chance to go through the questions. One other one I saw, which it looked like was somewhat answered, was just a little more depth on what's now being required in Florida high schools. So this is something that passed through the House, and I'm trying to think how many months ago it was, maybe 6 months ago or something, as a requirement for high school curriculum. So I believe it went into effect this fall. I believe it's a like a half semester course for credit, and it's just to cover pretty high level topics, right? Again, just like we were talking here, there's so many households, unfortunately, where basic financial literacy isn't really being talked about. The parents feel uncomfortable talking about it, maybe weren't taught a lot of these tools themselves. And so it's to talk about mortgages and understanding of amortization, what it means to have a mortgage and pay the mortgage back over the life of the mortgage, debt, credit cards, how credit cards work, the idea of compound interest, saving for retirement, pretty basic topics, but things that really all of us could use, whether it was talked about in our household or not. I think the reinforcement's important, but for so many, it's really one of the only touch points. And I'll also give a shout out to the fact that there's a lot of great resources that are popping out, right? So I'll give an internal shout out, right? Our recent venture capital competition. The winner was a app called Ostrich. And so their whole goal is to emphasize financial literacy, work with specifically mostly colleges to get students on an app, take a basic financial literacy quiz of current positioning and try to figure out what are some of the gaps, and then provide them with resources for how to improve in those areas. And just like Natalie showed, these type resources start all the way from early ages up to things that we easily could be utilizing as adults. What are some websites to give students to look into what stocks to start investing in? Natalie, do you have any thoughts as a advisor on that?
I think that with investing, that students should start with things they know. And so if that's Disney or Apple or Nike, whatever it is, that those are good places to start. And I think this is the person who's class of high schoolers, which I love, but if you could go through a Morningstar report and learn about market capitalization, so how big a company is, or price to earnings ratio, so growth expectations of a company, and put some, compare and contrast Coca-Cola to Microsoft, because those are going to be two wildly different sets of numbers, and talk about why that is. Those are good starting points. I had a client whose son, he wanted Sunday, was in the pandemic, to buy Target, because they were doing curbside service. And the son was like, Dad, I really want to buy T-Mobile. And this, it's like 13. The dad's like, why T-Mobile? He said, well, they have the largest 5G network out of any carrier, and people are going to need really good cell phone service when everyone's stuck at home because they're going to have to dial in. And so son bought T-Mobile and it outperformed Target. So just having those kind of critical, and I'm not saying that drives all of T-Mobile's performance, but just having those critical thinking skills. The other thing we talked about on stock picks versus passive investing is I love the idea, and we do this when I work with clients' children. We'll take an account and we'll split it half between the S&P 500 and half between their stock picks. So, you know, I had one that bought, what is it? The one that everyone bought. Sorry, GameStop and like all this stuff. And then we had the S&P 500, and just recognizing how one single security or thinking that you can outperform the market looks really different than having this larger basket of securities. It can be humbling at times, and it could also be ego boosting at times. So I like that approach to investing as well.
Yeah, I love those points. They were really pretty much exact parallels to what I was thinking as I opened the question up to you, right? So I think, first of all, passive investing, we all know the benefit of diversification, right? Whether that's just a broad concept to you or you really understand the math and stuff behind it. But I think helping our children recognize the whole idea of don't put all your eggs in one basket. But I do think it's very valuable for kids to have at least a small portion that they can make individual stock selections. And, you know, I'm a believer in a lot of Warren Buffett's teachings, right? You guys can see the book behind me. And he would heavily emphasize things you're familiar with, right? Just to Natalie's point, what do I interact with, and what do I see a good positive future for? And it really opens us back up to a lot of those conversations I had on the front end. Well, what about that business puts them in a good position? What gives them competitive advantages? How do you see them shifting over time and reaching new audiences? And so I think teach them what it means to own the stock and invest and let them start thinking of their own choices, but then break that out to the bigger strategy and really tie it into, well, why do you want to be an owner in this specific business? You know, again, Buffett has a really common saying he uses all the time about building a moat, right? We've got a castle and our moat is our competitive advantage. What is this company's moat, right? What makes them unique? So what about T-Mobile gave them a competitive advantage, or what about Target, right? And so I think helping the students start thinking through that, even if they can't do the technical analysis behind it, puts them so much further ahead and gets them in that, you know, so much of learning is just building out critical thinking processes, and you're getting that thought process in the back of their head as they start moving forward.
A question just came through about compound interest, and I'm so glad you asked this, because this is such a fun one to tackle early. So
yeah,
your kids from 7 to 9 are learning about money. Nothing in the world says that what you do with your kids has to be realistic. So just because your bank is only paying probably more these days, but 0.5% interest doesn't mean that you have to follow those rules. And so I'm a big fan of even doing it. And this is one where I am a fan of doing it with cash, but let's say your kid has a $10 bill and you say, if you keep this saved, I'll pay you 10% per month. Well, so month one, you're going to give them $1, right? And then it compounds from there, and just keeping that money separate where you can watch it grow and count what it is, that value of compound interest. And so doing it with cash is an easy one. And then when we start talking about compounding investment returns, obviously that's a little different, but it kind of seals that in. So I like early and I like physical examples of that. And again, it doesn't have to be, you could pay 100% interest. I don't care. It doesn't have to be realistic.
Yeah. And I love visuals. I think for so many people, the quickest way to grasping a topic is a visual, and compound interest is one of those. You can show a visual so quickly, right? I mean, go to Google Images and just search for compound interest over X number of years, right? Pick whatever number you want, and you can see the value of $1 grow quickly. You know, I would be more than happy for anyone that wants it to create you a really simple Excel model that you can put the interest rate and how many years, and you can show your child really quickly how much just $1 is going to grow to, and then let them change that principal amount and start to see that visual, because compound interest is something that is one of the biggest resources, one of the biggest tools we have, right? And so recognizing when I'm 18, if I start setting aside a little bit of money instead of buying that extra video game or something, that dollar has so much more impact than if I waited to invest that dollar for the first time at 45, right? It's just time is our friend in compounding. And so that visual, I know I got shown it at a pretty young age in high school or something, right? Maybe even before. And it stuck with me. It's like, wow, don't delay it. Start it today. And it doesn't mean it has to be a big dollar amount. We're pretty broke as, undergrad or whatever usually, but it doesn't matter. It's getting in the habit and starting to let that work to your advantage.
And I want to circle back on one other thing that was brought up earlier was charitable contributions. I do think there's an opportunity not just to be charitable or tithing or whatever you want to call it, but also to have real learning experiences there. So if my kids are, we did a lemonade stand to benefit a nonprofit my husband's president of the board of. They were like, well, can we ask people who can't come for money? So sure, I posted the lemonade stand on Facebook. Mommy and daddy said we would match it. They made $743. We were like, we weren't really, but like teaching them. And then when we go to the organization, one, they're taking the money to the, and this time we did take cash. They're taking the money to the organization. We took Venmo, by the way, so it wasn't all cash. But I said, you need to ask what they're going to use this for. And so they said, what are you going to use our $1,500 for? And the ED had to answer that, even if it's a church, what do you use this money for? And they can explain that it helps keep the lights on and pay this pastor salary because his job is to be there for the community. So it's a really good opportunity to teach about even the nonprofit side of things. So if it's the Humane Society, what do you use this for? We have to buy dog food for the dogs and hire a vet to come in and take care of them. So there's a lot of learning opportunities around charitable giving. And if it's a family value of yours, starting at the very beginning, I'll thank you for noting that because it was on my list and I didn't get there. But if it's a value of your family, do it from the very, very beginning.
Absolutely. Habit forming is huge, right? Kids pick up habits much more than we can ever recognize, right? And so I think starting habits early is a great tool.
Yeah.
Mike or Loveland, did you happen to capture any others? I think that was most of the questions I was able to see in the chat.
Yep, that's pretty much it. And for our guests here, if they have any more questions for you, Dr. Walkup and Natalie, was it okay to reach out directly to you all? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, even like I was just mentioning, you want that Excel model to show your 9-year-old? Let me know. I'll create it. It takes a few minutes, right? Yeah. I think, resources to help in this area are so needed. I think Natalie and I would both be more than happy to assist in any way we can.
Great.
Absolutely.
And we will share this recorded webinar, and if you're willing to share your slides to others as well, and then some of the resources that you mentioned, we will go ahead and send this out to everyone, not everyone that came here, but also to everybody that registered weren't able to make. I know I got a bunch of messages saying, will you share this to me? So this is very informative. I learned a lot today. I mean, I've taken finance class before, but this is all very great reminder for me and for our children. Any last comment, Mike? Do you have anything else you want to add before we close up?
Yeah, just a couple of things. But one, I'd like to ask Dr. Walkup and Natalie if they have some sort of crash course for rewiring a 16-year-old that his parents didn't do what they were supposed to do when he was younger. I'm just kind of thinking, I don't know if that's personal here in my household or not. Yes, it is. But no, great. Unbelievable topic, really intriguing, great chats going on as the presentation was going on. So yeah, thanks to William out there. I know Dr. Walkup, you gave him a shout out from Austria.
I didn't even realize he was in the audience till after, but yeah.
Yeah, he was out there answering questions as well. So thank you, William. We appreciate that. But thank you so much to Dr. Walkup and Natalie. Just thanks for doing this, but thanks for also all the thoughtfulness that went into preparing for this too, because you could tell that you have a passion for it. It comes across. I think it'll be very helpful, but we truly appreciate that. And as Loveland said, and as Natalie and Dr. Walkup said, please let us know if there's questions, if there's anything we can help. We will get this out to folks pretty quickly. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for carving out some time. We truly appreciate it. Hope everyone has a great day out there.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.